Hello, AP Biology students. Let's go over the fourth section in Unit 7. And in this section, we're going to talk about the evidence that supports the theory of evolution. I like to have my students memorize the word fame for this section. This helps them to remember the 4 different types of evidence, which are fossil, anatomical, molecular, and embryological. Let's talk about fossils first. These are obviously one of my favorite parts of all of science because I love paleontology, but basically fossils are the remains of once living organisms. And yes, there is a small portion of a species that actually becomes fossilized. This is because it takes certain conditions for an organism to become a fossil. And it typically takes hundreds to thousands of years for that organism to fossilize. But even with only less than 1% of a species becoming fossilized, we still have an extensive record that supports evolution. Something else I like to go over with this part is something called the law of superposition that basically explains how the oldest layers of Earth are further down in Earth's crust and the newest layers or the youngest layers are closer to the top. I like to think of a clothes basket. When you throw clothes in that clothes basket, they're going to start piling up, but the clothes that are at the bottom have been there the longest. The clothes at the top that you just recently threw in are the youngest. And something else we see in the law of superposition is something called complexity increasing, where the species here at the bottom that are the oldest are the least complex, while the species here at the top are the most complex. Now, it's not saying that us as humans, we're the most complex organisms ever. We are a really cool species out there, but it's just saying that complexity has increased over the billions of years that life has been on Earth. Our next field of evidence is anatomical evidence, and this is where we're going to be looking at the anatomy of organisms. Homologous structures are structures that are similar because they evolved from a common ancestor. All of these tetrapods above have a one bone, two bone, many bone feature that they inherited from a common ancestor that lived millions of years ago. As each species evolved differently over the millions of years, this one bone, two bone, many bone feature evolved a little bit differently to suit that species' needs. For example, you can see the bat here has very thin and long bones to help them fly, while the porpoise has very short and kind of thicker bones to help them push themselves through the water. So all of these tetrapods evolved this one bone, two bone, many bone feature to suit their needs, but they all inherited this feature from a common ancestor. Analogous structures are a little bit different. I like to say different structure, but same function. This shows that adaptations evolve similarly in different species to suit the needs of an environment. To give you an example, bat wings, bird wings, and butterfly wings all have the same purpose. They help the organism fly. However, they all evolve these different types of structures differently. If you think about bat wings, bird wings, and butterfly wings, they all have different modes of flying. However, they all evolved to meet the need to fly. So these are called analogous structures. Lastly, we have something called vestigial structures. And these are structures that evolved in a common ancestor. However, they don't have that same need or sometimes lose that need throughout time. We also have this tailbone that, yes, does help us with some support, but it was initially used for tails that we obviously don't have, but it's still there. We also have the appendix that doesn't have a major function in the digestive system like it does in other organisms. Our third field of evidence is molecular, and this is dealing with DNA. Various amounts of DNA are identical between species, and species that are more closely related have more identical DNA. We can also look at proteins and amino acids that are similar between different species and see the same resemblance. So we technically share DNA with all life on Earth, and that shows our, again, common ancestry with all life on Earth. Now, it's not saying if you take out like 98% of a human, you're going to get a chimpanzee. They have DNA that we don't have, and we have DNA that they don't have, but we have a large portion of DNA that is identical. It's because we, again, share a common ancestor. Our last field of evidence is embryological, which is a shorter part, but I still like to go over it. If we look at the patterns of embryological development, we can see the common ancestry that we share with all vertebrates. The similarities we see, again, early on in the embryological development, again, show us our common ancestry with other species.